We've reached the point in our program that we're going to ask Rick Luce, who is the Dean of University Libraries, Professor, and Peggy V. Helmerich Chair and Associate Vice President for Research at the University of Oklahoma. I said his title took almost a paragraph. Prior to his post at Oklahoma University, he was Vice Provost and Director of Libraries at Emory University, and he has served on 4 NSF Blue Ribbon panels and on the National Academy's Committee on Assuring Integrity of Research Data in an Era of E-Science. He is a member of the Share Steering Committee. He was awarded in his prior appointment at Los Alamos National Laboratory the Prize for Leadership, the first time it was ever given to anyone who wasn't a scientist. And he was in 1999 co-founder of the Open Archives Initiative. His accomplishments are legend and many, and I could go on, but I won't. I'm going to turn it over to Rick. Are you ready?
I guess so.
Okay, good. Rick.
Thank you, Jim. Do I have an echo back there? I'm good, thank you. Let me just begin first by acknowledging and thanking the program organizers who've made my job incredibly difficult because I put together such a rich and productive program. They did a great job. And secondly, I want to thank our hosts who've been unfailingly gracious and helpful members of the staff here at Harvard University. So this has been just a fabulous day and a half, and really grateful to be part of this experience. But it does make my job a little difficult. I thought I would start with a little bit of humor, and I was going to run a little simulation, which I guess we can't get to work. So I'm going to sort of narrates what I was going to say. But I'll send this back to the conference organizers, and we'll put it up on YouTube if you're interested in getting that later. So I've got this tough task of trying to go through what's happened in the last day and a half, and I wonder if I can't quite see what I'm looking at here without looking up there. I don't know if we can. I think I need to mirror this real quickly. If I could get quick assist on that. So I tried to capture, while she's getting that set up, I tried to capture just some of the highlights of what I heard, trying to look for some themes and some consistent ideas that have bubbled up in the last day and a half. Thank you. So some things jumped out at me. Research data management's messy, complex, evolving. Our collaborative future. Let's underscore that one, our collaborative future. It's a theme I want to return back to. From Saeed's talk, the future of data curation is a competition between information graphs. We don't have our story, essentially, to tell yet. We can't expect data to be consistent with persistent turnover. It's a really, really important insight and something that I see across many, many fields in our space. She made a very compelling case in terms of the data information literacy competencies. 20% higher use with the new ADS system in terms of papers linking that have data. Reproducibility, the scholarly record, needs to include much more than just what's contained in PDF articles. Computation presents only the potential for a third or fourth branch of scientific research until the development of comparable standards. Again, something I want to return back to. Very, very important point. We can provide digital humanities. We librarians can provide the digital humanities with things like negotiating with publishers, finding data sets, web services, data modeling, new data specs. Quote, I'd love to see the library acting as true partners, or librarians acting as true partners. We heard more about the DMP requirement and a space that In some ways, we're going to mediate between many of the people that we support in our institutions and requirements that we're looking at. Very helpful to have more insight into that. Data storage systems not aimed at knowledge integration. Well-crafted databases that help create community. Again, I want to bold create community that put researchers in touch with each other. Institutional repositories as one part of an ecosystem, optimized for long-tail research. Again, fit to purpose, I think an important point to understand there. And lastly, from Mercedes, the rate of deposits increasing in the Dataverse by a factor of 30 since last year. That's amazing. Amazing sort of adoption. And then integrating with other systems, and again, back to that theme of building community. So what can we make out of all this? A couple of things hit me very quickly. First of all, just to underscore what we all know, but reproducibility in science, really validating research, requires transparency and openness. It's a fundamental principle. We have a shifting landscape in terms of policies from funders, institutions, publishers. We've got technology-enabled advances. We've got next-generation services. So how do we really connect all these dots together as we think about what comes next? And I want to start with a perspective that says, delighted that I didn't hear a lot of agony in the last day and a half about compliance. Oh, we're getting made to do the following. Oh, we've got this requirement. I'm sure hearing a lot of that back home from PIs that I have to interact with day by day. So I'm glad we've elevated the discussion here over the last day and a half. But really, it's about a lot more than compliance. There's a larger perspective here, starting with open data standards, open data standing to deliver far more benefits than the challenges that it will create for all of us. That more eyes on tough problems are a really good thing. And we've got some really tough problems that we face as a nation and as a world community. And lots of really good eyes on those problems are probably one of the only things that's going to pull us through some of those challenges. Open data will provide really exciting new opportunities in instruction, broadening participation in research, and where universities in particular can connect to those that fund them in the private sector, economic development, and the relationship between those. We're likely to see the emergence of new tools. I think we saw certainly some development in that direction over the next day and a half. We're going to see this space really take off like a rocket. And I believe what we're also going to see is some understanding that I don't need a specific set of tools for my domain that's completely different from another set of tools over in that other domain, but we're going to look where we can start to cross domains with tools. And certainly that theme is something that began to emerge today, and we're going to see that develop also very, very rapidly. We didn't hear about, but let's not forget the idea of assessment. For open data, it's critical, but it's got to be done really in a very, very thoughtful way. So that will be coming. So what do we have in the landscape? At the moment, about 9 plans, or as I've looked at, about 9 plans out of 18 or 19 federal agencies. Out of the 9 plans, there's essentially 6 different ways of complying with requirements. At a high level, there's a lot of consistency. At a deep dive level, there's all kinds of variability all over the map. And if you've got somebody that's funded from 2 agencies, it's going to get very, very interesting how I comply with both and what are the differences, et cetera. So we're going to need some translators and some guides in terms of how to deal with different agencies. Because frankly, the feds have a hard time talking to one another, just like we in the university community sometimes have a hard time talking with one another. We can see some commonalities. Setting the default to open, supporting reproducibility, using established resources and investments in repositories is very much encouraged and leveraged. So not a need for sort of completely wipe the slate, let's start from scratch, but let's build on what we have. That's a sometimes good and sometimes not so good reality. Inventories will become critical. The agencies will be generating inventories of existing data sets, or in some cases, generating inventories of what should be in existing data sets. And then you can imagine some other entity coming out and doing data audits. And so you say you have the following, and actually where is it? And can you show it? And can you prove it? Et cetera. So we need to think about that. A recognition that discovery is critical. Agencies will develop and have announced essentially a plan to develop public catalogs of data holdings. Let's hope that that's not 19 different catalogs, and it's something, in fact, less than 6. But that space will evolve. And finally, and I think importantly, certainly for those that are in the creative space of doing the research and creating, if you will, what comes out of that research, attribution for data is certainly coming, and advancing data as a legitimate form of scholarship, again, underscored in these data plans. So some really good things. Let's look at value proposition real quickly for open access to data, the replication, reproducibility in research, interpretation, and analysis in an open market. Again, hard to argue with these things. Opportunities for collaboration, not just in numerous ways, but in multidisciplinary ways. Follow-on study should occur more quickly, so faster progress in these areas. The identification of unknown problems. Here's actually a great new opportunity space, identifying unknown problems to be able to follow up on or start greater accountability in the responsible conduct of research. Credit for gathering, generating, and making data available in the teaching space, online engaged learning, and in economic development, the corporate research and development that will come out of providing analytics. So on one hand, one could look at that list and say, okay, those are things that we know about, and we've got these policies from the feds, all is good. But there's a few clouds on the horizon. An interesting report sort of tweeted out of NERSC, access to data is up, but effectiveness in applying insights is down. Very, very interesting. If you kind of look at the data, you see that this particular study was in a corporate environment, nonetheless problematic. So just providing more access certainly doesn't solve a problem or the problem. It provides more access. It doesn't necessarily lead to insight. Problems, however, are sort of manifold and many. We've got significant issues with reference link rot. An article in Nature, originally posted in PLOS One, talks about essentially being not able to follow links in a consistent manner over even a short period of time in a reliable manner. So if I can't read an article and follow the link, it doesn't matter what we're doing on the data creation side. Those links have got to be durable. They've got to be persistent. And this is clearly a problem in this sort of state of play today. Another problem in the state of play today is that scientists are losing data at a rapid rate. Again, an article here from Nature, if you look at a period of about 5 years, and say somewhere between 75 and 80% is probably not good enough. And then that curve, again, continues to kind of fall off. So are the systems we're putting in place, are we able to audit those in a way that we're able to change essentially this curve here? I think is one of the things that we need to start thinking about and perhaps testing over time as we move forward. It's not that the data that's being lost isn't valuable. NASA's frequently sort of used as an example of having collected great data in the 60s on reel-to-reel tapes that were put in a warehouse, forgotten about, and could never be read again. Here's an article from Science about long-lost satellite data revealing new insights to climate change. So there are some good stories in terms of data recovery, and I think some really important understanding here from a public perspective about maybe there is something to these longer investments that need to be made in terms of data. So can we see some trends here in terms of what we're looking at? First of all, I think digital repositories, as we've been hearing about in the last day and a half, and we can see are evolving. They're slowly maturing. However, many, not all, but many weren't really architected for data. They were architected for conference papers and articles, and so now we're in a different space, and we need to acknowledge that. I have a note to myself here. I recall it was actually in Santa Fe. Paul Ginsberg, Herbert von de Sampel, and I, over some glasses of wine, decided we were tired of waiting for things to happen, and let's call a convention, which was called the Santa Fe Convention, and that led to OAI PMH in 1999. And we said, let's do something for about a year or two that would be the lowest possible barrier to get people started, and then we'll quickly grow from there. Here we are in 2015, and that can't be the state of the art. I refuse, but that's where we are. We are seeing some, I use the term very loosely, de facto, sort of community-based, standards-like. We see some things emerging across different domains into this very large ecosystem that I think are important. Adoption of ORCID IDs. Things like CASRA and CRIS systems in terms of thinking about grant management and where that's going. And those systems starting to dovetail research administration, if you will, grant administration, starting to dovetail with how we think about repositories and how libraries sort of see their role. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. We're also beginning to see some threading together of, again, in this environment, of different kinds of approaches or different areas with efforts like SHARE, CORE, Open Air, et cetera, as repository communities. We heard also data repository communities, DataCite, Dataverse, here at Harvard, the DMP tool at University of California, Digital Library. So these are some things I think really to pay attention to in the ecosystem, and if you're not part of them, to quickly get them on the radar screen and start to ask, why not? How do we really start to build community and participate aggressively in those opportunities? Secondly, in terms of federal funding mandates, we will see an interest in funders and researchers in data deposit increasing, and I think substantially. So it is significant that although we'll hear some, we're getting asked to do the following and, you know, one more thing to do, et cetera. At the end of the day, people are starting to stand back and say, you know, that actually makes sense. My science does need to be out where it can be consumed. I do want people to have an opportunity to see what I've done and to participate in some way, and so we're going to get there, and the community is starting to move very, very quickly. We're seeing, I think, more rapid movement than we are in this country, in Europe, in the UK. Now there's a difference. It's a little bit more centrally directed, and Canada also beginning to move very quickly in this space. But that's a good thing. There's nothing like getting a little bit behind to go faster. And so we need to think about how that becomes an asset in our environment. We're moving forward, I think, rapidly. In fact, we've got about one order of magnitude more experiments and data going on than we had projected in terms of our funding proposal in the SHARE environment. So the first phase of SHARE is essentially a notification system. And one of the things that we'll try to do is to begin to harvest feeds from all of these different repositories of sort of every description and of every kind. So that'll be the first layer, and we'll continue to build on that. We've already, from the data that we've collected, we've already found something that won't surprise a single librarian in the room, which is the data coming out of these repositories is incredibly messy. It's incredibly bad metadata, very inconsistent, but it is what it is. And so we're trying to build tools to really improve the feed that we're getting. So share notify is growing, I think something to pay attention to connect to, and to watch. A third trend really is outside of our community, in the larger ecosphere, the web of data, and really our evolution from pages to data, and what makes that environment work. It's identifiers, it's semantics, it's links, it's resolvers. Guess what? That's exactly what libraries have done and do and for decades. It's just been done in a different way, but that's exactly the strength of where those of us sort of representing the library slice of this puzzle come from, and something that we actually know a great deal about. So the forward-moving libraries are really evolving into an enterprise hub for academic assets. And I think we've had a couple of really good illustrations of that today. There's some other examples out there. And the question is, how do we get all of our libraries moving collectively much faster? So what are the roles for libraries? Bill Michener, among other things, PI for Data One, says, oh gosh, that's easy. I need someone, an institution, to plan, collect, assure, describe, preserve, discover, integrate, and analyze as sort of a sidekick for all the work that we need to do. No small order. But if we start to think about that space and data, I think Saeed said it really well yesterday, and that really takes us to the new special collections, our data and data publishing. National Academies of Sciences report in 2011, most scientific fields do not have a systematic means of making data available. Still true now. So if we think about data as a special collection and an area that needs curation and attention and so forth, we can provide consulting services, at least at the institutional level, to knowledge aggregation for data management plans. We could move in a larger way and in a more impactful way, sort of up a curve, and provide systematic annotation and actually redefine what readers can expect. Readers or machines, I should say, can expect, and enable editions of publications to interact directly, machine to machine, to really build much larger and more dynamic collections. We could start to think about leveraging our metadata expertise, so optimizing what we do really for robotic readers and stop optimizing for humans. We could say we refuse to deal with anything that's not at least XML, throw away the PDF. It's gone, it's dead. So what does the library look like in the age of data? I think it starts to look like library as actually identifier, minter, as resolver, as one of a suite of opportunities for repositing data and articles, as a data manager, as an access provider, as a preservation steward, as not the, but a hub of scholarly entity management, as a reconciliation engine. And I'm struck again by this. Harken back to the comment about what kind of messy data is coming in to share. So communities oftentimes build collections of things. They're not necessarily reconciled within that collection, and almost very, very rarely are they done in a way that can be reconciled outside of that particular domain. So real value to be added there. And finally, as an authoritative source, steward of data. So I mentioned identifiers growing rapidly. One of the things that we're doing now as part of orientation for anybody coming to OU, and the first meeting with her librarian is to sit down and say, do you have your ORCID ID yet? That's part of your onboarding package, and signed up and just from day one. Another space that I think that we've been too slow to move, and we need to really put ourselves on steroids in libraries, is how we really look at value-added workflow. So let's think about metadata capture and how we work in the upstream. Instead of being downstream and this entity has been produced, it is way upstream as part of the research team. This is something had started at at Los Alamos, was really sending people into project design phase, into the grant phase, into the very early phases. And so metadata capture actually was thought about at the beginning and not at the end. Timestamping, tagging, georeferencing, and depositing data. So thinking about actually the collection of data, not after the fact how I'm going to describe it, but up front. If I'm building a sensor to drop into the ocean, to follow ocean currents, thinking about what that looks like way ahead of time, instead of I've got all the sensor data and now how do I make sense of it? And then, of course, that would take us logically to start to think about, well, if I can start to describe this upstream, how do I think about the semantics of really putting that together and the semantic web? So space, I think, they're partnering with scientists, researchers that could really add some value into the space that's rapidly evolving. I'm going to reference Tony Hay and his co-author here. He's written an article very recently in Nature Physics, an editorial, talks about access to computer software, computer code is one step, but reproducibility requires more. And this theme came up a number of times in the talks that we heard. So computational science, thinking about reproducibility, is, yes, collecting computer code and thinking about a description of that code, but it's fraught with the problem of many funding agencies viewing software development as just an intellectual exercise not worthy of really funding. So some of the questions that we had in the Q&A sessions around software development, we're behind industry, why could that be? Well, if you can't get money in your grant to hire sort of the level of professionalism that you'd like, you have to make do with what you can. It's not in the grant, it's not well funded. That leads to huge problems in terms then of continuity. Maintaining open source software is not free. It requires some standards, standard education, if you will, some standard, just like to be a nurse in the healthcare system requires a degree of certification and training. Writing code isn't just anybody off the street able to be plunked into a team and we expect we're going to have something that we can document, replicate, and run on other machines. The environment's too complex to be able to do that. And the problem of professionalism. So most of professionals writing code on the teams, these are our efforts that sort of, I have a grant, I'm going to be on my grant for 3, 4, 5 years, I'm going to hire some postdocs, I'm doing genome research, I need to know somebody that understands what I'm talking about. If they can write code, that's great, but they've got to start with somebody that knows the lingo that we're going to speak. And so that leads to, we get a postdoc in, highly qualified, does coding on the side, and 3 years later has a job opportunity and hopefully career advancement. But staying locked in on that team is not a real recognized career path, and that's a real problem in terms of how we think about reproducibility and what we do with software code. What's happening in our larger environment? I'm going to try to speed up here, but so think about 95. We had monolithic environments. 2015 today, we're living with, we've got a cloud environment, we assemble things sort of from a variety of different services, and we're very, very quickly moving to a space where we've got microservices and multiple clouds, and those things have to start to integrate together. And so we're looking at, if you will, a more atomic sort of structure that we're having to knit together, and that's a far more dynamic and different environment. The opportunity space, again, I think is in this space here where we've got a stack, and that third layer in the stack typically is not supported or filled in by many institutions. And that layer, that third layer in a 4-layer cake, I think is where, again, we can build a set of capabilities people, services, tools that move horizontally across what connect vertical domains. And so that's the opportunity space. Lots of challenges in terms of doing that. I like to think of the space, I heard the term, and I had it kind of queued up, so I wanted to make sure you use it, data wranglers. A lot of space for an opportunity for people that are facile with data in the environments that we're putting together. So it's all about then relationships. If we think about our organizations and our roles, it's about our relationships. Relationships with customers, relationships with stakeholders, and actually relationships with sort of outside the enterprise as well. So how do we build and maintain those relationships where we're really one of these key nodes that causes those things together? I call it crossing the T. I see the T, the vertical part of the T is the various domains we're supporting and an institution poised really to be the sort of the capital on the T, the horizontal integration. So this has to happen not just in our institutions, and here's the challenge. It needs to happen across institutions because no institution, Harvard, the Library of Congress, the British Library, there's no institution large enough to cover the space that we talked about today. There's no community we're going to be able to support from a single institution. So the question is, how do we really think strategically about how we partner and do that far more rapidly? I want to kind of close with just a quick example to make the point of we need to live with what we create. So I got about $300,000 a few months ago to create a nav app in the library because I've been saying we don't need to just create tools and services. We need to live with what we're creating. And I'm going to take the people in my organization who are supporting my customers through what we're creating so that they can experience what our customers are experiencing. So we have an upcoming exhibition, Galileos World. Let's put together an application. We're going to use beacons to do that. We're going to do that in about 5 different buildings. The beacons allow us to navigate inside the building, allow us to push information, multimedia, virtual reality information. So I can walk up to an exhibit here, point my phone at it, and it'll tell me what I want to know about that. I could plan my trip through the exhibition ahead of time. I could have an interaction and mail it back off to my home, et cetera, et cetera. But the exciting thing for me is that while this is going on, all kinds of data is being collected. Where are the hot spots? So think about heat maps. What data is downloaded, isn't downloaded? We've got 300 digitized monographs that we're putting on display in this exhibition. Was that a worthwhile investment? How often are they used? What pages are used? For how long? What connects from the exhibit to what people actually do in the digital environment? So this is data I've been asking for. What's the return on the investment I'm making for a long time? We're going to actually have data now streaming into us from across the institution that we're going to be able to sit back and start to analyze, experiment with, and use in a very active way. I'd love to have some other institutions that I could start to talk to say, this is what we've learned, what have you learned? Are we doing this, is this unique or not? So we're going to try to live with what we're creating. Rich, rich opportunity. So I think our role really is to assert that we're the authoritative, trusted repository of curated, preserved, and persistent knowledge. And that means our paradigms, our organizations, our staffing models and staffing profiles, our compensation, our career tracks, and on and on and on need to look radically different. So in closing, done at scale and with persistence, the 21st century library is a key nodal connector. If we're active, if we're forceful, if we're aggressive, it's an essential node, an enabling engine for managing and serving the scholarly and academic research communities in the university and beyond. Thanks so much. I probably overstayed my time. I don't know if we have time for questions or not, but thanks for your attention. You've held out.